Okay.
Get
Good.
Michelle back.
Okay, sure. Let me probably want you to introduce her.
What's the title of the book?
Ida,
Somebody's asking.
oh yeah, Ida be the Queen. Look how beautiful this is. All right. I'll show you a little bit later. Welcome, everyone, to a glorious evening of honoring Ida B. Wells, her life and legacy, and also Happy Women's History Month. So it's a pretty significant month. On behalf of the Center for Racial Healing, where Dr. Meeks is our executive director, we welcome you. My name is Dominique Hardy, and I am so thankful to serve as the program manager for the Center for Racial Healing. And it is going to be a very exciting conversation. And so we appreciate your timeliness and your enthusiasm and the fact that everyone's from everywhere. Wonderful, Anne, yes. And so without further ado here, I just want to provide a few technical instructions for you. As I'm seeing a lot of familiar faces and a couple of news. So if you look to the bottom of your screen, you will see the Q&A. At the appropriate time after our guest speaker today, you'll have the opportunity to ask some questions and we will engage those. So we ask that you put those questions in the Q&A section, which is different than the chat box. And so obviously you can put anything in the chat box that you desire, but the Q&A, we actually ask that you will put that in the Q&A section because sometimes, you know, sometimes people get them mixed up. And I do see it looks like a couple of people are raising their hands, but yeah, so the hand icon feature most likely we'll just be using the Q&A, but if you need to directly message me, then you can go to the icon in the chat box next to the two box and you'll see all panelists or my name, well, it's about to say Dominique. Okay, so now I will introduce to you the executive director and another one of our sheroes of modern day time, Dr. Catherine Meeks.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. And um, welcome, everyone. It's so delightful to have you joining us today for this wonderful event. We tried to have Michelle Duster here last year, and we got circumvented by the coronavirus. And so thank God we have been able to shift our gears and move to the virtual platform that makes it possible to have this meeting today and to have all of you present from all around the country, which would not have been the case if we were inside of our buildings. So that's one of the gifts of this era, that we can be more expansive. So thank you so very much. It is an absolute honor and delight for me to introduce to you our speaker for this evening. And I want to just read you a little bit about her. Uh, Michelle Duster is an author, professor, public historian, and champion of racial and gender equity. She has written, edited, or contributed to 16 books. She co-wrote the popular children's history book, Tate and His Historic Dream, and co-edited Impact, Personal Portraits of Activism, Shifts, and an anthology of women's growth through change, Michelle Obama's impact on African-American women and girls, and edited 2 books that include the writings of her paternal great-grandmother, Ida B. Wells. She has written articles for Time, Essence, Huffington Post, Teen Vogue, and the North Star. She has appeared on MSNBC, CNN, WTW, CBS, as well as numerous radio shows. Her advocacy has led to streets, names, monuments, historical markers, and other public history projects that highlight women and African Americans, including Wells. In her book, Ida B. the Queen, The Extraordinary Life and Legacy of Ida B. Wells, was published in January of this year. And I want to say thank you for holding that up, Dominique. Ida B. the Queen, The Extraordinary Life and Legacy of Ida B. Wells. If you you need to get it as quickly as you can. It is a delightful book, and just pleasant to just thumb through, and even more engaging to sit and read and to enjoy the artwork and the photographs and the amazing information that she has put together that is so important for all of us to be engaging. So it is my great pleasure to welcome you, Michelle, to our affair this afternoon, and to this audience.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dr. Meeks, for that great introduction, and Dominique for all that you have done to make this event happen. And thank you for all for attending from all over the country, it sounds like. So yeah, that is one of the benefits of this COVID world, is that people can live wherever they want to live, and still gather together in the same virtual space. So I'm going to be talking about the life and legacy of my great-grandmother, Ida B. Wells, and also give some overview of some of the tributes to her that have been executed, but also some that are in the works, because part of it is about her legacy. So I'm going to, I think you need to make it so that I can share my screen, Dominique.
Okay, sure.
Either that or I can just talk it through.
No, sure. You can share it. Hold on just a moment.
Okay, sorry about this.
No, it is okay. There you are. So you should see it in just a moment.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
So let me just make it so that it takes up the whole screen.
Perfect.
Okay, so I'm going to be talking about the life and legacy of my great-grandmother, but really what I have concluded over the time that I've been talking about and thinking about and writing about the work of my great-grandmother is really what she was fighting for was first-class citizenship. That just encapsulates what all of the work that she was doing was about. So most of you might know, but if not, this is just an overview of all of the things that she did in her life. She started her career as an educator, and she segued into journalism while she was working as a teacher. She ultimately became an anti-lynching crusader, where she used journalism as a form of activism. She was co-editor, she was editor and she was co-owner of several newspapers. She's considered in today's world to be a civil rights activist. She was one of the co-founders of the NAACP and the National Association of Colored Women's Clubs. She got involved in the suffrage movement later on in her life, and founded the Alpha Suffrage Club, which was an all-Black suffrage organization. She was a community organizer in today's language. That would be what she was doing. She also was considered to be a social worker in today's world. At that time, it didn't have that label. And then she also was involved in fair housing advocacy. So before I get into all of the details of her life, I'll just explain how I'm actually related to Ida. So this is her. She had 4 children. So her name was Ida B. Wells, and she got married to Ferdinand Barnett. So then she hyphenated her name to Ida B. Wells Barnett. She had 4 children, and her youngest child and youngest daughter was Elfrida Barnett. And then Elfrida Barnett, my grandmother, got married to a man with the last name Duster. So then her last name was Duster. And my grandmother had 5 children. And so her middle child was Donald Duster, who is my father. And then I have 2 brothers. So that's my family tree. That's how I'm related to Ida. My grandmother, like I mentioned, had 5 children, and so she had a total of 15 grandchildren. So I grew up as one of 15 of her grandchildren. There are 13 of us surviving, and then there are a few other great-grandchildren from Ida's son. So there are actually quite a few of us. And then there are 2 generations after me. And I'm going to call out a couple of my cousins who are grandparents. So there are quite a few of us. So I'm going to kind of go into more detail about the life experiences that my great-grandmother had. And these are the pivotal points in her life. This is what I have decided are the sort of turning points in her life, which all of us have these, certain things that changes the trajectory of your life. So she was born enslaved in Holly Springs, Mississippi, which is in northern Mississippi. It's actually not really super far from Memphis, and that's significant in her life story as well. Holly Springs was a urban area, and so she had a slightly different, well, her parents actually had a slightly different experience than what we usually think of when it comes to slavery, which is more like rural, agrarian, picking cotton or dealing with tobacco or things like that. But they grew up, they were working in the city. Her father was a carpenter and her mother was a cook. And she, Ida, was one of 8 children, and she was the oldest. So she grew up with these parents who had spent their entire lives enslaved until 1865. So Ida was 3 years old when slavery ended. So she really didn't grow up under the slavery system. She grew up during Reconstruction, which was the period of time in our country's history from 1865 to 1877, only 12 years. A very short period of time when you think about our country's history, which took place right after slavery ended. That was a period of time when there was an enormous amount of progress for formerly enslaved people. People had the right to vote. Well, there were 3 amendments that were passed during this period of time, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. The 13th was about ending slavery. The 14th was about citizenship, and the 15th Amendment, which was passed in 1870, was about Black men getting the right to vote. So Ida grew up in a family, a politically engaged and civically engaged family, where her father was very enthusiastic about taking advantage of the right to vote. He was involved in political organizations. He would go to meetings. They would have meetings at their home. And so Ida grew up surrounded in this environment that was about progress and about taking advantage of all of these new rights. Black people finally had the right to own property and start businesses. And so she grew up during this period of time, which is very significant, I think, when it comes to who she became and what shaped her attitudes. So she was the first generation of formerly enslaved people to have the right to become formally educated in these areas where slavery had been legal. And so she attended what is now Rusk College. At the time, it was Shaw University in Holly Springs. And so she, because she was educated, she was asked by her father to read the newspaper to his friends, because most formerly enslaved people were illiterate. And so to me, that gave her it gave her training to speak in front of groups of people. It gave her training to speak in front of men, which she did often in her life after she became an adult. So the turning point early in her life was that both of her parents died when she was 16 years old from a yellow fever epidemic. They died within 1 day of each other. And so that left Ida and all of her siblings as orphans. There were 5 remaining siblings at this point because there were a couple that did pass away before. And so Ida, at the age of 16, decided to become the breadwinner and the lead of her family. And so she got a job as a teacher in a rural school outside of Holly Springs in order to take care of her 5 younger siblings, herself and her grandmother, who moved into the house to help take care of the children. And so at the age of 16, she had an enormous amount of responsibility. And she took that on for a couple of years. And then she ultimately moved to Memphis to live with an aunt who was widowed and had 3 children, and 2 of Ida's sisters went with her. So at that point, her family had been separated. Her brothers and one of her sisters ended up staying in Mississippi. So once she was in Memphis, Memphis really shaped who my great-grandmother became. She got involved in a lot of social organizations called lyceums that were like literary clubs. She became editor of the newsletters of the lyceums. She started to grow her reputation as a writer. And she was doing all of this while she was teaching. And then she had a significant situation in 1883 when she was commuting from Memphis to Woodstock, which is where she was teaching, where she was asked to leave the ladies' car on the train to go to the colored car. Now, like I said, she was raised during the Reconstruction when there was all of this progress. And so then there was this backlash, this rollback of all of these rights that she had actually grown up with. And so she refused to go back to living under Jim Crow laws or under second-class citizenship. So she physically fought 3 men who tried to remove her from the train. And she was so humiliated by that situation. And she decided that she was going to stand up for herself and sue the railroad. She had another incident in 1884, a year later, going back from Woodstock back to Memphis. And so she decided to sue on the basis of the railroad being separate and unequal when it came to racial separation. She initially won the lawsuit in 1884, but then it was overturned 2.5 years later in 1887. And that was a devastating blow for her because it created a situation where she felt that Black people could not get justice through the legal system. And that's significant if you feel like the law is against you. At that time, she had gotten to the point where she owned a newspaper. And so she wrote about what was going on. She wrote about the lawsuit. She also wrote about the teaching conditions that were separate and unequal. And so she ultimately lost her teaching job. So she had several losses that were about injustice for her. And so she decided to focus all of her energy on growing the newspaper. While she was out in 1892 soliciting subscriptions for her newspaper, 3 of her friends were lynched in Memphis. And so these men they owned a grocery store called the People's Grocery, and they were upstanding citizens. They were leaders in the community. They were business owners, entrepreneurs, just upstanding people. And for them to be lynched, in long story short, they were attacked, they defended themselves, and then they were the ones that were considered the perpetrators of the violence and arrested and ultimately lynched. And so all of these things cumulatively created an environment and an attitude within my great-grandmother that there was no way for Black people to get justice in our country, because the people who were supposedly upholding the law were the ones that were committing the crimes. So she decided to do everything she could to help people understand what was really going on in the South when it came to this mob rule and total lawlessness and barbarism. And so she wrote about all of these atrocities in her newspaper. Ultimately, her life was threatened and her printing press was destroyed. That sent her to she traveled overseas to Great Britain and the United Kingdom. And she ultimately settled in Chicago. So one of the things that she did when it came to writing was when she was in New York, and she was there for about a year, she partnered with T. Thomas Fortune and wrote for his newspaper, The New York Age. She actually got 1/4 interest in the newspaper, and she wrote a series of columns about what was happening in the South regarding lynching in order to educate the northern part of the country about what was going on. There was such a thing back in the day in 1892 called fake news. Um, and and that was the false narrative in mainstream newspapers about what was going on regarding lynching, which was basically criminalizing Blackness and having this constant narrative that Black men were violating white women, that they were predators and bestial people. And, you know, we've heard this language even more in our day where we're called super predators. So there was that type of language going on in my great grandmother's time. And so she took it upon herself to help people understand that lynching was being used as a form of domestic terrorism, a way of oppression, and a way of sort of creating, it was a backlash against Black progress. That's what was really going on when it came to lynching, because a lot of times the people who were the victims were the leaders in the community. They were people who were advancing. They were business owners. They were you know, some people involved in politics. And so the idea obviously is if you get rid of leaders or you terrorize people, then they'll, you know, not aspire to move into certain spaces socially. So she compiled her newspaper articles into a pamphlet called Southern Horrors, Lynch Law in All Its Phases. And the idea was to educate people in the North about what was going on in the South, with the idea that people in the North would put pressure on the people in the South about this form of terrorism. She, like I said, she went to England in 1893. She came back and came to Chicago, and she participated in a pamphlet called The Reason Why the Colored American is Not in the World's Columbian Exposition, which was a pamphlet that was distributed at the World's Fair to educate people who were from all over the world about what was going on in this country, how the United States of America was treating its own citizens as second-class citizens. Again, she was trying to take an international approach to this, which is what we see today, right now, when it comes to Burma or Myanmar. She was doing the same thing then that is happening now, where there's dialogue and helping people understand overseas in other countries what's happening. She wrote a Red Record in 1895, Lynch Law in Georgia, in the subsequent pamphlets to chronicle not only lynching, but the last two were about race riots that took place. And that's kind of another conversation, but just briefly, race riots were, you know, violence against entire communities, obviously, which is slightly different than some of the lynchings that were taking place that were more about individual people. These are some of the covers. These are the covers of some of her pamphlets, just so you can see what they looked like in their original form. Like I mentioned, later in her life, my great-grandmother got involved in the suffrage movement. Now, she was one of the co-founders of the National Association of Colored Women's Clubs in 1896. We have to remember that women did not have the right to vote for most of my great-grandmother's life. And so women had formed women's clubs in order to have a collective way of addressing social issues because they didn't have the vote. So they could still coordinate and put pressure as a group onto people who could vote and to solve some of the social issues as a collective. But in 1913, my great-grandmother founded the Alpha Suffrage Club in Chicago as the first all-Black suffrage club in the state of Illinois. And she immediately represented the club at a march, the suffrage march, the famous suffrage march in Washington, D.C. It took place actually yesterday. It was in March 3rd of 1913. It was the day before the inauguration of Woodrow Wilson. And so she famously was part of desegregating that march because there was a request that Black women march in the back of that parade, and she did not do that. She figured out a way to insert herself into the Illinois delegation front and center along with the other 62 white women from the state of Illinois. She also founded the Negro Fellowship League, which was a rooming house for Black migrants who came to Chicago and were having a tough time adjusting to city life and finding jobs. And so she opened this rooming house because the YMCA did not welcome Black men. And so it was her answer to the YMCA. Just really briefly, because this is what I started my book with, was the FBI actually surveilled my great-grandmother in the late 19-teens because this was during World War I, when there were all of these questions on who was a patriot, and there was an Espionage Act, and questions on who is criticizing the government. There were all of these sort of rules that were put in place by the Woodrow Wilson administration. And so she was actually surveilled because she questioned and criticized the government because there was an incident in Houston, Texas, where some Black soldiers were murdered. They were hanged and imprisoned because they were charged with treason, and so she found that to be unacceptable, that the government would execute its own soldiers. That's a whole nother story what happened in Houston, but the bottom line is that my great-grandmother printed buttons, and she wanted to have a memorial service in honor of these soldiers, and for that she was questioned and threatened with treason because they said she was criticizing the government. And she was not intimidated at all by that threat, and just continued on distributing these buttons. And one of the last things that she did in her life, which is really audacious, in 1930, 1 year before she died, was she actually ran for state senate. I want to backtrack one second with the suffrage movement, with the Alpha Suffrage Club in Chicago in 1913. Illinois gave women the partial suffrage in 1913, later on that year. And as a result of that, it was just kind of strange, because partial suffrage, meaning that women could vote in presidential elections and in local elections, but they couldn't vote for statewide elections, like for the governor. So it was just this, I don't even understand why they had these weird sort of like polar opposite. You could vote for presidential and you could vote for local. So immediately after she formed the suffrage club, she and her fellow Alpha Suffrage Club members canvassed for Oscar DePriest, who ultimately became the first African-American alderman in the city of Chicago. And so she showed her, by her actions, that Black women have a political power and we can build a political base, which is exactly along the lines of what Stacey Abrams just did in the state of Georgia. So I'm going to segue to talking about her legacy, my great-grandmother's legacy, and how my family has been involved for 80 years now in making sure that this country remembers the contributions of my great-grandmother, and ultimately, the contributions of many other women who were her contemporaries and people who have come after her. So the first thing is my grandmother, who was Ida's daughter, edited and published my great-grandmother's autobiography, Crusade for Justice. Now, my great-grandmother died in 1931, and Crusade for Justice was published in 1970. So almost 40 years later is when that's how long it took for my grandmother to get that book done. My father's generation, which I mentioned there were five of them, they started the Ida B. Wells Memorial Foundation in 1988. So it's been over 30 years that the foundation has been in existence. And they provided a lot of support for the film, the PBS film that was part of the American experience called Ida B. Wells, A Passion for Justice, that was done by William Greaves. And then Paula Giddings wrote the most comprehensive biography that will probably ever be written about Ida, called Ida, A Sword Among Lions. And my father and his siblings provided an enormous amount of support to Paula Giddings as far as giving her access to information. She, interviewed them multiple times. And so that book, out of almost all the other biographies, has the most information that's directly from our family. And then my brothers and I have continued on with the foundation, and we give scholarships to students at Ross College, which is Ida's alma mater. It's an HBCU, so we are giving back to people who are following in Ida's footsteps. We also support some public history projects that are about remembering who my great-grandmother was, but also others who are doing similar work. My brother and I do a lot of speaking, public speaking and presentations about the work of my great-grandmother. One of the other things we do is there's this Ida B. Wells Barnett Museum in Holly Springs, Mississippi, which is actually the house that Ida's parents worked in. And so it's just fitting that particular house, the actual house where they were enslaved, is now the Ida B. Wells Barnett Museum in Holly Springs. There's Ida B's table that was created in Baltimore in 2017 in honor of Ida, in order to recognize her. And the theme of the restaurant is journalism and paying homage to Ida. And then our family has been involved. We created a marker to remember Ida's parents in Holly Springs, because, as I said, they died in a yellow fever epidemic. So there was just a mass grave and no markers. So we wanted people to remember them. And in Memphis, as I mentioned, she lived in Memphis for a little over 10 years. There was a marker placed on Beale Street, right near where the printing press was. It was placed in 1987. And this year, there are actually going to be two different projects that are installed in Memphis. One is recognizing equality trailblazers, so mostly suffragists from Tennessee. And so that's going to include 13 different people. And then there's a standalone statue of Ida that's being created. And for those who are interested in traveling to Memphis, the statue is going to be unveiled on July 16th this year, which is her actual birthday. And so you're more than welcome to show up for that unveiling ceremony. She's included in several museums, the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C., the Gustavo Museum here in Chicago, the Civil Rights Museum in Memphis, and then the newly created Legacy Museum in Montgomery, Alabama, which was created in 2018. There was another tribute to her at the Rose Bowl in 2020, which I actually attended, or I actually participated in it. And then she lived in Brooklyn for about a year. And so last year, there was a street that was co-named after her, where on the street that she lived in. Okay. So there's more tributes to her, a postage stamp, there's schools named after her, professional societies and awards, the various halls of fame around the country. She was part of a Google Doodle in 2015. And then last year, fittingly on May 4th, 2020, she was awarded the Pulitzer Prize Special Citation for the contribution that she gave to journalism regarding her reporting of lynching. And that date just struck me because May 4th was the date that she was thrown off the train in 1884. And then in 2020, the exact same date, she was awarded an award. So her life and legacy kind of went full circle there. So these are the names of the people that will be included on the monument in Memphis. And this is what the monument will look like. There will be a total of 6 busts and 13 people included on the monument. And this is the sculptor is working on the bust of Ida. What's going on here? So I have been involved. I've written several books. I was involved in a street names in Chicago, a monument, and currently working on a mural. And so in my book that I just recently published, the idea of the book, and for those who want to know more about my great-grandmother's life, the idea of the book was to introduce my great-grandmother to a younger audience, a new audience, to help people see how her life fit into the 400-year story of African Americans, and how the resistance that she was involved in is a continuum of the resistance that we have been involved in our country for all of these centuries, and to connect the work that she did with what people are doing today. If you think about it, a lot of what's happening today when it comes to different forms of activism are a continuum of the kind of work that she was doing. And what she was doing were speaking truth to power. She was working and protesting alone at times. She was organizing, as I mentioned, involved in founding several organizations. With her journalism, she was taking control of the narrative that was pervasive at that time. And obviously, as a suffragist, she was involved in political empowerment, and then as well, building institutions. So these are the 6 different tactics that she used during the course of her life. And just to close out, as a descendant of her, people ask all the time, like, what was passed down in our family? And so the values that were passed down from one generation to another, and are still being passed down to my little cousins who are, 4 years old right now, is to, educate yourself, become as educated as you possibly can be. You want to make sure that you stand up for your rights and believe that your voice is important. You want to stay focused on a goal and do not let anybody set limits on you or be intimidated by anybody. And so in closing, I just wanted to show this one last quote that my great-grandmother had, which kind of resonated with me, because to me this shows that a life well lived, one where there is no regrets, where she says, "I could no longer hold my peace, and I feel, yes, I am sure that if it had to be done over again, provided no one else was the loser save myself, I would do and say the very same thing." And that resonates with me because I just feel like you can't ask for anything more, right? At the end of your life, you absolutely have no regrets. And even though her life was not easy, she suffered, many different setbacks and hardships and challenges. But she faced them, with courage and bravery, and obviously didn't have any kind of regrets for what she did with her life. So hopefully this is inspiring to all of you, and we can continue the conversation through Q&A.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ms. Duster. That was phenomenal. People have quite a few questions, and so if it's okay with you all, we'll jump right in. Pat, first of all, says, "Thank you so much, Ms. Duster, for your presentation tonight. I greatly appreciate it." Pat says, "I'm wondering how your great-grandmother would feel about knowing that lynching is continued through 2020 with George Floyd and others. Do you have any thoughts or comments on that?"
Well, like I said, I mean, my great-grandmother, Ida B. Wells, spent the great majority of her life, well, she spent her entire life, adult life, fighting for freedom, justice, and equality. And she spent, she's now well known for being a pioneer in investigative journalism. She pioneered what's called data journalism during her day. And even some people consider her to be an early sociologist because not only was she writing down names, dates, locations, the rationales that were being used to justify lynching people, but she also was chronicling the social environment and the social ramifications. So she was not just reporting on these and and chronicling just facts, but she was analyzing what was happening at that time. And she was very clear. I was honestly just reading her pamphlet on the Arkansas race riot the other day. Yeah, I do this for fun. I read through pamphlets from over 100 years ago about riots that took place, and it's phenomenal if you all just want to read these documents of how she put two and two together to recognize that this type of violence that was being perpetrated against the African American community was about economic control, and to some extent social control, obviously. And so we are still fighting those battles today. This sort of idea that only certain people deserve to be in certain spaces. Only certain people deserve to be at certain levels of power, and whenever there is any kind of threat to that type of, what some people think of as a social hierarchy, then there's a backlash against it. So, we have a long history in this country of violence against African Americans that goes without any level of punishment whatsoever. So the lack of regard for our lives when it comes to justice has been pervasive from the very beginning. So, long story, I think that my great-grandmother would probably be disappointed, that 90 years after she died, after spending 50 years of her life, so that's 140 years of struggle just within her lifetime and after, that we've been dealing with some of the same issues.
Thank you very much. Very powerful. The next question is from Charlene. She said, do you know if your great-grandmother expressed an opinion regarding the Back to Africa movement?
Yeah, she actually did interact with Marcus Garvey. And she had some, well, what they had in common was the idea that Black people needed to be self-sufficient. Mm-hmm. And so she encouraged that. As far as literally moving back to Africa, the impression that I got was that her attitude was that we built this country and we need to become full citizens of this country. So, and not that she was against it, but I think she was more about, we need to get what we deserve here.
Okay, that's very interesting, because that was leading into another thought regarding reparations and what her thoughts were concerning that. So you touched on that a tad bit, but is there anything you want to add in that regards as it relates to reparations for Black Americans?
I cannot answer what my great-grandmother thought about reparations,
right.
But what I can say about my own opinion is that even when I think about in my own family history, which I just mentioned about how my great-grandmother's printing press was destroyed and everything she owned, and she only had what she had. But when she was traveling, she traveled to Philadelphia for a conference. And so while she was there is when her printing press was destroyed. So obviously the only thing she had was whatever, I guess, a suitcase or a trunk or whatever that she had with her when she went to Philadelphia. So everything she had was destroyed and lost. And there are moments when I wonder what kind of family wealth we would have. Right. If her printing press had not been destroyed. What if, the last 140 years we could have built that printing press into, Hearst or Condé Nast or something like that, so that's a lot of loss, and it's hard to calculate because it would be, how do you project, over the past 140 years how it could have grown. But that's one example in my own family. And then, like I said, reading that Arkansas race riot pamphlet, where she chronicled, I mean, to the penny, how much property the people lost in that riot. I mean, if people want to just calculate, they can just look at that particular document and, you know, go by inflation and see how much money we actually, I feel, are owed because there was mass destruction of multiple communities in our country, all Black communities. I mean, there was a race riot in 1866 in Memphis that destroyed an enormous amount of property. We could think of Tulsa, Oklahoma's Black Wall Street, you know, Rosewood, Wilmington, North Carolina in 1898, and then there was East St. Louis. And you look at all of the policies when it comes to redlining and restrictive covenants. You know, Black people, Black veterans could not take advantage of the GI Bill after World War II. I mean, we could talk all day about how we have been robbed from economic equity in this country. And it was institutionalized. This is, you know, people today say, well, it wasn't my fault. As you know, that you know, my great-grandparents did this and I didn't do this, I didn't own slaves, or I didn't do that, all of these things as an individual. That's true. Nobody alive today lived during slavery, but people alive today are benefiting from what they inherited,
right,
as a result of this massive amount of disenfranchisement, and it's because of institutional policies. And so institutionally and legally, it needs to be resolved. That's what I think.
Ooh, yes, thank you for that. I see you all. I see you all have so many questions. Okay, the next one is from Rachel. When speaking to your grandmother, did she ever speak about what it was like growing up with Ida B. Wells as a mother?
She didn't talk about that as much as one would think. I mean, my grandmother really, when I think back on it, my grandmother really was more focused on us than she was about telling us about her mother. I mean, she really, I appreciate, you know, that she would come to our plays and she would come, we always spent, you know, holidays together and, you know, birthday parties, barbecues, like we were a normal family. I mean, to me, that's normal, you know, and so we interacted in ways that were just about, you know, just hanging out. It wasn't like I was sitting in a lecture hall, you know, listening to my grandmother talk about her mother. She would drop it into conversations more about her mother's values than, you know, sort of telling us stories about what it was like growing up with her mother. I mean, part of it, see, the thing is that my grandmother died when I was in college. And so I never really had an adult relationship with her. And I think that matters because most people, when they're talking to children, are going to talk to them in a certain level of detail differently than they would, you know, if you're having two adult conversations. So, you know, my grandmother just kind of, you know, how do you talk to an 8-year-old or 7-year-old about your mother? It's just, right. Wasn't a lot of detail.
Thank you. The next question is from Jocelyn. She says, how did the house where her parents were slaves come to be the museum?
Well, that was facilitated by the mayor of Holly Springs. I wasn't involved at all in knowing in you know, that transaction, but I guess there was a combination of historians that figured out that particular house was where Ida was born on that land, and her parents worked there, and then somehow in the town of Holly Springs, the house became available, and so the city of Holly Springs, the mayor at that time, was involved in making that possible.
Awesome. Thank you. The next question is from Ruth. She says, if she started teaching at age 16, when did she complete her college education at Rusk college?
She actually did not finish college. I mean, she, you have to remember this is in the 1870s. And, so things were quite different, that shortly after slavery than they are today. I mean, so people could get jobs, at certain levels way more than they could ever do the same thing today. But she had to drop out of Rusk College, and Rusk College, that's what it's called today, but it was not really a whole college the way we think about it today. It was basically like a one-room schoolhouse, where it was multi-generation. That's how the schools were. Right after slavery, there were one-room schoolhouses littered through the South, and so we can't think in today's terms about how these institutions were, 155 years ago. But she got as far as her 16, years old, being educated at what is now Rusk College. But then what she did once she moved to Memphis and was actually teaching was she did take some classes at Fisk University and Lemoyne College, which in today's world would be considered continuing education, in order to, further her education when it came to being an educator. So she was taking like summer classes.
Thank you. Amy said, I noticed on 2 of the PowerPoint slides an item titled Ida B. Wells table. Can you expand on what that table was? And does it still exist today? If so, where can I find it?
That's Ida B's Table, which is the restaurant that is in Baltimore. And it's a restaurant that was created in 2017. And it was created by a group of people involved in journalism. And actually the Real News Network is the name of the independent news organization. And they decided they wanted to create a restaurant with a newspaper theme. And they chose Ida B. Wells as the person that they wanted to pay tribute to. So if you go to that restaurant, it is in Baltimore. It is open. We do have a lot of interaction with the people at the restaurant. And now, because after COVID, during COVID now, I've heard that they are now open for 25% in-person capacity. So they have in the restaurant like a wall that gives a brief bio of Ida. The theme is restaurant. So different things look like newspapers and, that kind of thing. So that's what it is. It's called Ida B's Table is the name of the restaurant. And actually that's the website also. I think it's idabstable.com.
Great to know. Thank you. The next question from Regina is, did Ida B. Wells have a particular faith? If your answer is yes, can you speak to what role her faith played in her life and social justice actions?
Well, yes, my great-grandmother was very religious. She didn't really belong to one particular denomination. From what I gathered from her diary in particular that she kept when she was in Memphis, the way I could be wrong, but I mean, my way of interpreting what she wrote about herself was that she was kind of a church hopper. I mean, she went to church, but she went to a lot of churches. And so, I mean, there were some times when she would go to 2 or 3 churches in one day. And it didn't seem to matter to her what the denomination was. Like, she just would go because she wanted to hear that particular minister or a particular message. And then at that time, and still some, in some communities to this day, the church was a social center, where there were a lot of activities at churches. And so she would go to hear a lecture at this church and go to hear a panel at that church and hear some kind of reading or see a play or, all these different, it was like the center of a lot of social activity. When she got married at an AME church in Chicago called Bethel AME, and she attended for a while, and then she switched over to Presbyterian. I mean, she was just all over the place. But she was very religious. I mean, if you read her diary, there's some of the entries are almost to me like letters to God, where she was kind of having conversation with, sort of drawing on her faith to give her the strength to, continue moving forward and to figure out how to, address certain challenges and things like that. So she had very strong faith.
Thank you. And I know we're probably only going to have time for a couple of more, but this is a really great one. Kathleen says, were the Black men leaders open to your great-grandmother's actions and speeches during her lifetime?
Some were and some weren't. I mean, she was very well appreciated by certain people, like to say T. Thomas Fortune spoke very highly of her and was very supportive of her. Same thing with Frederick Douglass, who actually ended up being kind of in a mentor relationship with her. He was about 45 years older than her. So she was, young enough to be his granddaughter, but he really did provide a lot of support for her. And I actually included a letter exchange that they had between the two of them in one of the books that I edited, because I thought it was so interesting how much support that he provided for her. And they had, they disagreed with each other sometimes, which I also think is interesting to note. But then there were others, who really did have a problem with her. And they were pretty vocal in criticizing her in public spaces. So she kind of had both, which is, I guess, just that's how things go. No matter what you do, somebody's going to have a problem with it, and somebody's going to actually be appreciative.
Yes, that is so true. Kendall, this is a fantastic question. She says, Ms. Dester, thank you so much for your presentation. If you could pinpoint one quality that you feel connects you most to your great-grandmother, what would that quality be?
I think when I have, in these last really like 15 years, the last 15 years of my career, when I've made decisions about which direction I want to go and what approach I want to take to doing certain projects, I actually have taken some form of inspiration from the tactics that my great-grandmother used when it came to producing projects in certain ways, because she was very resourceful about getting financial support in interesting ways. I mean, she would find people to sponsor her, some of her projects. And I've been involved in several projects in these last few years. And when I've thought about how to approach gaining support, I actually have looked at some of the tactics that she used. So I would say if that's, sort of organizing and or sort of business savvy, that's where I have kind of drawn on her, on the work that she did to figure out how did she do it.
Yes, well, I can personally say, Ms. Dester, that we're so grateful that you did and that what you continue to share with us. Somebody, I know our time is running short here, but people keep asking, she showed you the book, Ida Be the Queen. I'm going to send out a email with the replay to you all where you will be able to access a direct link to purchase the book for those who are asking. I see several people are asking that. And the final question, and then we'll turn it over to Dr. Meeks for final remarks here, is from Amy. She says, your presentation is wonderful. I'm curious if your family has shared any of Ida B. Wells's things with museums.
We really don't have very much to share, but her desk is at the DuSable Museum in Chicago, and one set of her dishes are at the Smithsonian.
Thank you. And for the other questions, you all, if you can, when you come back next week, we would appreciate if you would bring those same questions back, and we'll see if we can get to more of them. Thank you all for your time, and thank you, Ms. Duster and Dr. Meeks.
Mhm.
Thank you. Thank you, Dominique. Thank you, Miss Michelle Duster. You're always so wonderful.
Yes.
And I just can't get enough of listening to you. And I think that the thing that so warms my heart is, as we talked the last time we were together, your family helped you to be the authentic person that you could be, the same as your great grandmother was the authentic person that she could be. And I think that that's such an important message, that you don't have to be a carbon copy of anybody. You don't have to be trying to fill somebody else's shoes. You don't have to be trying to be somebody you're not, but to be yourself. And you've done that in such marvelous ways and helped to illumine your great grandmother, but also to make a point about what your contributions are that are to be made to us. And we're so grateful for your being that way in the world and doing that work, and for being with us today. And we so look forward to having you back next Thursday to have more conversation. And I can't say enough about Ida B. the Queen. You do not want to wait a minute to order the book and get your hands on it and start reading it. And then you want to read other things on Ida B. But more important than anything else, you want to try to see if you can find the courage to live your life as courageously as she did, in whatever ways you're called to do that. And I'm always, as always, it's important for me to say, the Center for Racial Healing does all of these programs, and we do them with just a great sense of gratitude. And we invite you to contribute in any amount of donation that you would want to contribute to the center, because this is the way we keep the center going. So please contribute and tell other people about our programs, invite folks to our website, invite people to join us in our programs and to join us in signing up to get our newsletter and other information that we are doing. All of this is about helping to heal our land, and we stand in great need of healing, as we have always since the beginning of this country been standing in the need of healing, and we all have to contribute to that. So thank you for your presence here. Thank you for being involved with the center, and thank you, Ms. Duster, so much for being with us. And thank you, Dominique, for managing everything as you always do in such a good way. And we'll see you next Thursday.
Bye. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you so much.